You've been taking care of the house for long?
I have been living in the area since 1989.
So you were here when...
I was here when? Yes.
When what?
You haven't told him.
Well, no, not yet.
Told me what?
He must know. He must understand.
Understand what?
Years ago, there was a plague. Do you know about it?
Only a little.
What little do you know about it?
Many men died.
Well, that could be said of any plague. What marks this as different?
Many gay men died.
Why did they die?
I suppose it's because these men's illness required Americans to think about the means by which they contracted it. Required that we look at gay men and accept their nature, accept their affections, their desires for one another as equal to our own, and most people couldn't do that, and in our discomfort, we let them die. For years, men came to this house in search of compassion, and Walter took them in. He allowed them to leave this world with a kind of dignity they had long been denied while living in it. I know this because one of the men who came here to die was my son. Shall we go inside?
She was reluctant to say more, wanting it seemed to open the house and continue her day, but Leo kept her in the yard a while longer, pressing her with questions, until eventually she began to tell them about her son.
He and I were both children when he was born. Only 17 years apart in age. I was far too young to be given any responsibility, let alone motherhood. The news of my condition was not met with joy. Had we been Catholic, we might have blamed it on Immaculate Conception. But we were Southern Baptists, we blamed it on bourbon. I named him Michael after my father, hoping to soften the anger over the pregnancy. You never saw a girl as frightened as I was the day that Michael came into the world. I stared at him as he slept. I slipped my finger into his tiny hands, which he grabbed onto with such strength, and that grip and that unwillingness to let go that astonished me. This helpless creature, encountering another human, gripping them, holding them tightly, as if fearing that to let go might risk never being held again. That was the first time in my life I understood I was needed. And it was the first time in my life I truly felt love. Shall we?
What was Michael like?
He was kind, gentle, honest, a touch willful, but also a touch fragile. Michael was effeminate as a child. We called it sensitive, of course. Oh, others use less compassionate words. I would pray two things about Michael every night. God, please protect him. God, please don't let him be queer.
And were your prayers answered?
I took matters into my own hands. I bought Michael a set of weights, and Michael grew muscles. And by the time he was 18 and announced he was moving to New York, he stood 6'3". He weighed 220 pounds, pure solid muscle. I sent Michael out into the world certain that however effeminate he might be, at least his imposing physique would keep the queers away. Well, what the hell did I know? The night before he left, Michael and I stayed up late talking. I kept putting off sleep. I knew the morning would bring with it his departure. I told him, find a church when he got there. Find himself a nice girl, get in good with her family, I said. That way he'd be sure to have a decent meal every now and again. And he told me, and I will never forget the look of calm, knowing certainty in his eyes as he did. He told me there would not be any girls for him, not in the way that I meant. Mama, he said, I'm homosexual. I am going to New York to fall in love. That was more than I could bear to listen to. No, I said, you're confused and you're afraid. Oh, you're so very young. In truth, I was the one who was afraid of losing him, afraid of he would be harmed, and afraid for his soul. I told him he could not be my son and be like that. I told him he would die of disease or violence. I told him he would spend eternity in hell. Oh, you know what he said to me? Well, that's better than spending your life in South Carolina. Oh, I can admire the moxie now. That night I wanted to hit him. Oh. My only consolation is I didn't, but the damage had been done. I was no longer his mother, his protector, his one safe person in the world. In that moment, I made myself a stranger to my son. If I'd known that night he would only live another 7 years, I would have held him in my arms, told him I love him. I would have placed my hands in his fists like I did when he was a baby. I would have shown him kindness.
But you didn't do that?
Nope, I went to bed. I prayed and I cried. I tended my own needs. I ignored my sons, and by the time I woke up the next morning, Michael was gone. I did not see him again until the day he died. We spoke intermittently over the years, short, terse conversations over the phone. Christmas, Easter, my birthday. We never talked about his life. I never asked him about his feelings or inquired about his heart. Several years went by. I did not speak to Michael at all. Then one day the phone rang, and it was a stranger's voice on the line. He said his name was Walter Poole. He was a friend of my son, and he was calling to tell me Michael was sick. He was taking care of him at his home in upstate New York. He didn't think Michael had long to live, and if I wanted to visit, I should come soon. Does he have it? I asked. Yes, he answered. But Walter opened the door for me. I walked inside. I climbed the stairs to the room, the bedroom where Michael lay, but I did not know the man that I saw there, and I said as much to Walter. Well, he assured me this was Michael Timothy Avery, my son, aged 25 years, asleep, breathing shallowly, hours away from death. My Michael? I said to Walter, I haven't seen his face in 7 years. He asked me why I came. I came to tell him how angry I am at him. Well, Walter said, now is your chance. I stared at my son, hours away from death. And I answered, I think he must know by now. I walked to the bed. His hair was short and brittle. His face was covered in lesions. He looked older than I did. I looked at his hands. There was fungus growing under the nails, and I slipped my hands into his, waiting for Michael to squeeze them as he once had. I kept my vigil for 7 hours. Walter brought me food. I couldn't eat it. I couldn't leave Michael's side. The sun started to come up, and Michael stirred. He opened his eyes. He smiled at me. "Hello, Mama," he said. His voice no more than a croak. Then he closed his eyes. And then he squeezed my hands. I sat another hour as Michael faded away from me, his grip on my hands weakening. And then finally he stopped breathing and died. And slipped between my fingers. Died.